After taking a gunshot to the chest and surviving, then later finding himself incarcerated, Dr. Halim Ali made a new decision that he was going to dedicate himself to elevating others who were navigating some of the dark tunnels he's been through in his life. This led to founding From the Heart Enterprises, a Denver nonprofit having a tremendous impact on people of all ages. Dr. Ali is a true force for good, and I can't wait to share his inspiration on this episode of Making Our World Better.
Welcome to the Making Our World Better podcast, where you will find motivation and encouragement through lively conversations with inspirational people who every day are making our world a better place. Now, here's your host, Jay Clark.
Welcome to the podcast. I am Jay Clark, and I am honored to have a conversation with Dr. Halim Ali, founder and executive director of From the Heart Enterprises in Denver, an organization dedicated to making a difference through mental health. Dr. Ali is an activist, mentor, master facilitator, motivational speaker, mental health professional, and soon-to-be author, aiming to transform traumatic experience and lifestyles by restoring the mind, creating strong personal foundations, restoring personal life balance, and implementing wellness tools to apply for a lifetime. Gosh, he makes me feel like such a slacker. He works directly with the Denver metro community and its suburbs. He was always advocating for the empowerment of the people and creating a profound awareness of mental health issues throughout Colorado to establish healthy American families. His story of how he's come to positively impact his community and beyond through his work is super inspiring. I can't wait to get into all of it. Dr. Ali, welcome and thanks for joining me.
It is my pleasure, Jay. Thank you for having me, my friend.
Well, let's start simple. And how would you describe From the Heart Enterprises to somebody that doesn't know anything about it?
You know what I would say? From the Heart was born from the needs of the people. From the Heart just basically saw a gap, saw disparagement, saw the disproportionate, the disproportionality that exists in education, that exists just in life overall. So our first programs were really built to serve the people because we didn't see service in that area.
That's the story of every great nonprofit, right? But your story, your personal story really struck me. It's one of trauma, transformation, and really what I'd call triumph. And I know you've told it a million times, but I'd love if you would share some of the journey to what got you to where you are today doing this kind of work.
Oh man, Jay, where do you want to start? I mean, because it was things that happened in childhood, in adolescence, when I becoming a teen, and then young adulthood. Right. So
I would say, with starting with in the teen area, because that's really a large focus of the work that you're working with.
Okay.
The folks you're working with.
Beautiful. Now, in that time, I would say high school, my life was always filled with violence leading up to high school. So the 9th, 10th grade, by the time I got there, I have 2 older brothers. I'm the middle son of 5. So I was always fighting. My father was a pug and we always kept boxing gloves. So by the time I was in the 12th grade, I had been finally expelled from all Aurora public schools. I was suspended about 27 times in 3 years for fighting. Finally expelled, and I ended up having to move to Denver because I couldn't go to any APS. Moved to Denver, and I was just pushed through the system. I didn't really go to school. Once I went to Denver, that's when I started ditching and drinking during lunchtime, right?
Right.
And from there, I would say graduating high school, straight into the street. I was shot in my chest a year after graduating.
Wow.
Right? Yeah, because that same violent temper and that same violent path that I had taken all my life led me to the end of a gun. And the perpetrator shot me. So I was at that point, 20.
Wow.
And once I lived, it wasn't like that pulled me back or I heeded that warning or that admonition. It actually thrusted me further into the gang culture and street life. I felt like at that point I was invincible.
Wow.
Right? I got shot and I survived.
Right.
I'm the man. Right. And then I have all of my friends around me. They're like, oh, in the street, they say you're OG now. You got shot and you lived, you're OG. This is a status symbol,
Wow.
a badge of so-called honor. So I would say from that point, Jay, and being a hip hop artist, so with talking about the violence in the streets in my songs and promulgating that whole way of life,
right,
for about the next 12 to 15 years until it ended me in jail in 2014. And I was incarcerated for about 403 days.
Wow.
And that's where, you know, I made the decision to be an asset and no longer a liability. Right. So I came home from jail after that 403 days and I did my first event. This was January 2nd, 2016. I hadn't quite identified the name From the Heart. I knew I wanted to do something from the heart. So my first event was called Rags to Redemption. And it was a suit gifting event / job fair for men exiting incarceration and rehabilitation institutions. And we served on that day about 140 men.
Wow.
We had 200 suits and gave, about 150, 160 suits out.
Wow.
We had a personal stylist from Nordstrom come and help the men find their sizes. And I was the keynote and we fed the men. We talked about the hiring process and a lot of these men haven't used computers.
Right.
So there was a gentleman there, I remember, from Arkansas, and he had been incarcerated for 10 years. He had only been out for 3 days and he came to my event.
Wow.
After I did the keynote, I walked around, I shook everybody's hand. I saw this man later on at another event, maybe 2 months later. And there were maybe 100 people at this event, and I was speaking there. And he stood up in front of everybody and talked about how he was gainfully employed at that time and how he was full of hopelessness and despair. And then he came to our event. And he said, as a result of coming to the event, that's when he said he's gainfully employed. He was missing teeth in the front. He said he got his teeth fixed, and he pointed to me and he said, that man gave me my humanity back.
Wow. Wow.
And when I heard that was the beginning of From the Heart. That's all I needed.
I was going to say that's the aha moment. I'm on to something here. That's awesome. Well, I loved when I saw an interview with you where you said, a lot of the violence, a lot of the drug use, the roots of that are really some mental health issues. And I know that that's a big part of what you tackle. Do you still see, I don't like the word stigma, but do you still see it's kind of a stigma where it's really hard for somebody to take that first step and ask for help?
Absolutely. And
that's sad, isn't it?
It is sad, Jay. However, when I look at and I live off of statistics. I review certain statistics daily, but there's a statistic from the CDC which says 3 men per minute commit suicide. It's about 310,000 men or something like that a year.
I mean, think of that. That's
right.
It's unfathomable. Yeah.
And think about, there's a video in adult mental health first aid where there's a young man, 17, still in high school, and he's in San Francisco and he decides that he's going to jump off of the San Francisco bridge and take his life. And the day that he gets on the trolley to go and end his life, he says to himself, if just one person asks me how I'm doing, I won't do it. If just one person asks. So he said he made it all the way to his destination, got to the bridge, was walking to the bridge, and here comes this tall, beautiful Australian woman. And she says, excuse me. And he said he felt an immediate sense of relief. And she says, will you take my picture? And so she hands him the camera. He takes the picture, proceeds to the bridge, and jumps off. And lives.
Oh, geez.
breaks every bone in his body. And he said immediately when he jumped, he wanted to live. But the point that I'm making is sometimes just asking someone how they're doing. Right? Because think about the hyper-masculine culture we live in, Jay. Right. It is not in vogue for a man to say, give me a hug, or I love you, or I'm hurting.
And do you find that a little more aggravated when it comes to men of color?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I see it. And to be honest with you, I see it more from we had a conversation about mental disorders and mental illness right now. And the difference being mental illness, something that you're born with. Mental disorder is something that may happen systemically or environmentally, right? That you're at the mercy of, right? So what I see now are more disorders prevalent in terms of as it regards or as it relates to self-harm.
Yep.
Right. So friends who have done periods in battle or who are veterans, right, who have seen certain things. There's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And when I tell you, it's one of the most disturbing books on psychology I've ever read, but it's so real, right? Just in terms of the internal struggle that is happening, that we're fighting with, that we're using alcohol to mask or drugs to mask or over-sexualizing to mask or overeating to mask, overworking to mask, all of the indulgences, over-shopping, right?
Well, and I would think, I've talked to veterans, the veteran suicide numbers are just jarring, shake you to your core. Teen suicide, it's terrible. And do you find that, in talking to some people about the teen suicide, the scary part of it is those kids, when you talk about masking, you'll ask them how they're doing and they'll hide. They won't say how they're doing when they're really struggling. So you really got to be able to dig deep.
Well, and you know what? Something I learned a few years ago, when we, it's just like picking my daughter up from school. I won't say, how was your day? Right. I'll say, what was the best part of your day? Something that creates a conversation. Right. So instead of asking these questions that are easy to answer with one word, a yes or a no, right? Because also in adult mental health first aid, they have this acronym called ALGEE, ALGEE. And this is an acronym that is useful when you may feel like someone is going to self-harm or is at risk, right? So the A stands for to assess for the risk of suicide or harm. And of course, if that is prevalent, then we definitely want to call the authorities. The L, now if that's not prevalent, then the L is for listen non-judgmentally. Right? Listen non-judgmentally. The G being give reassurance and support. The first E is to encourage professional help. And the second E is to encourage self-help. Right? But I feel like what I find, to be honest with you, Jay, is our children are dying for a voice. Yeah. They're dying to be heard. So we had 20 young men at La Foret Retreat Center in Colorado Springs, Colorado, from April 21st to April 24th with our Rites of Passage program, all between the ages of 13 to 17, and majority young men of color. When I tell you on the second day, I asked how many of you guys have been impacted by gun violence or suicide, and every hand went up. And I immediately had to shift gear. It was no longer about the curriculum or what we were planning to do with programming. I had to give them the floor. Right. And for the next 3-4 hours, they talked about their emotions. They went through the feelings of revenge, retaliation, the feeling of loss, like a part of them had been taken that can never be restored.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, man. So to me, what I see is they're dying for a voice. They're dying to be heard. Yeah. But we have to ask the right questions.
One thing I've learned is how important, being able to talk to somebody who's been where you are or what you're feeling. And I would think this is a big advantage for you. You've walked in all these kids' shoes. So, and I saw another interview with you where you said, when you can talk to somebody and they suddenly have this feeling that, oh, me too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that had to be such a big thing when you're dealing with all those kids, for them to feel like they're talking to somebody that knows exactly where they've been.
Well, Jay, and I'm sure that you can relate to this, and anyone that's listening can relate to this as well. We don't always know the purpose of why we go through things. And I was looking at my life at a certain stage of my life as if I had wasted my life with getting in trouble and getting shot and catching felonies. And I'm like, what have I done? I've just thrown away a life. And then to be in a space where lived experience is almost everything.
Yeah, that's the space you're living in right now.
And there's a statistic which says young men between the ages of 8 to 18 who have that positive role model who looks like them are 50% less likely to get involved in the criminal justice system.
50%.
50% less likely.
Wow.
So these statistics, they drive me. They drive my work, right? That's why I was late tapping in with you. I was sitting mentoring a young man, and I told him I had to go, and he just wouldn't stop. I said, man, I gotta go.
Time well spent.
But we connect. You know, I connect very easily, and they can tell that when you're authentic and when you mean it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean it.
Well, talk about a little bit more about some of the other awesome programs that you do through From the Heart. I love the Mile High Chess Club, the after school enrichment, the workshops, the wellness Sundays. Tell us about some of all this great stuff that you're doing to fill these gaps.
Wow. Well, I tell you what, where we started, Jay, with our legacy program, the monthly family service day. Now, we started this in 2017. And each month, on the last Sunday of the month, we get together as a community, the families of our mentees and the mentors, we all come together and we create hygiene bags, typically 300 to 400 hygiene bags. And then we get out as a community and we serve the public, the houseless downtown, Jesus Saves, St. Francis. So now this is a legacy program that I saw necessary outside of all of the other mental health work that I'll talk a little bit about. Mm-hmm. But when it came to our youth services, whether it was one-on-one, peer-to-peer, whether it was the Mile High Chess Club, we didn't have a buy-in from parents a lot of times. So we created the monthly family service day to get that buy-in.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Right. So the parents can understand what we're doing, right? That this is not just a box we're trying to check by having your children part of our program. So that would be one program that I would like to, just highlight. That's 4 years.
Fantastic.
Well, 5 years. Right now it's 2023. That's 5 years in the running. Now, what we've done, Jay, we focus on modalities. So one of the benefits I received as an executive director, and as I was being prepared for this role with From the Heart, I was part of the prevention team with Denver Human Services. Nice. On a prevention team called DPALS, Denver Parent Advocates Lending Support, right? And Denver Human Services put me through maybe 4 or 5 train the trainers, right? And those are 3 to 5 day, 8-hour-a-day trainings, right? So I went through the train the trainer with youth mental health first aid, adult mental health first aid, 5 protective factors, wellness recovery action plan, habilitation, empowerment, accountability therapy, all of these modalities, right? And then what we do, we will use these modalities as From the Heart in a way that speaks to the demographic that we're working with. So if we talk about habilitation, empowerment, accountability therapy, that's the HEAT program. And this was created by 2 African-American men especially for young men between the ages of 13 to 18 who have criminal justice involvement.
Beautiful.
Right. So we have that division, but we have maybe three different approaches when it comes to that curriculum. So we will do one-on-one group. We will, the group session, the one-on-one peer-to-peer, and we also have a multi-generational approach within that modality, right? Because it's not just for the youth. We work with the parents too, right? And connect that gap, ideally. So we have about, I would say currently, Jay, 12 to 15 different strategies that we use in order to address and approach mental health, behavioral health, suicide prevention, and gun violence awareness. So another program, like we just talked a little bit about triggers. That's our annual gun violence and suicide prevention awareness event. We just did the second day on MLK Day on the 16th. And on the second day, now the first night is built for identifying the why. Why are we here? Right? So it's a 4-hour event. We did it at the Collaboratory Complex this year in December. And we had Sarah Hornbuckle from the Hornbuckle Foundation. They're a recovery organization. I was just promoted to vice president of that organization, but we're doing great work in the recovery area. But she came and she sang a song. She plays a beautiful acoustic guitar and she sang a beautiful song called Trauma. We had a young lady come and play her violin. And then I spoke about some statistics, and then we brought up Matthew and Jonathan to tell their story. So that was the first day. The second day is we focus more on community solutions, right? So we will begin to look at the reasons why we end up in these spaces, why we may end up in a depressive state with suicide ideation, right? How do we end up here? And what can we do to keep from ending up here? How did I end up with a gun in my hand attempting to shoot somebody?
Yeah.
What led up to that point? Right. So let's look at the life. So we looked at what we call the recovery topics. Let's look at the life stressors and triggers that may have occurred. Right. Let's look at early warning signs. Let's look at what's happening when things are breaking down. And then let's ultimately look at crisis. What do you look like when you're in crisis? So that whole day was about crisis prevention, but identifying what leads to crisis, those steps. Because crisis doesn't just happen. So that's another program.
Yeah.
So you see, this is my passion. This is my love.
It's a big web. I love it.
Yeah, man. So, we have our alternative lifestyle event. And these are for our youth who, successfully complete the rigorous aspects of the program. Then we'll give them something like take them to Boondocks or Dave and Buster's, and we'll go tear the place up all day. Right. So, because I feel like with these youth, it cannot be cookie cutter. So then we have an event called Learn, Grow, Elevate. This is our Saturday program where we serve our 8 to 12-year-olds. Nice. Right now, this is a co-ed program. It's about an hour and a half. What we do, we start off with some meditation and some mindfulness, and then we'll get into what I call the Shaolin Temple, and I'll show them some blocks and some self-defense moves, and we do push-ups, jumping jacks, things of that nature. And then we sit in a circle for about 45 minutes, and we talk about social issues. We talk about bullying. We talk about respect at home, what's going on with mom, what's going on with dad, right? In a community space to where they're able to provide that peer support to each other, right?
Love it.
So, and I can keep going, Jay. So
I love it.
You asked a loaded question.
Well, the thing I love about it so much is that, you think of somebody who wants to be involved with this, how they can find a shallow entry point, and you're providing that for them. This would be so much different if it was a government program or a social service program. The fact that you're providing a shallow entry point for people of all ages. I mean, with those young kids building those great habits, it's beautiful. So one thing I do want to ask about, we say soon to be author. Tell us about what you're writing.
Wow, that's a great question. So look, I started off writing my autobiography.
Oh, geez,
right?
Yeah.
My story, telling my story. And it has begun to unfold in so many ways. So what started off to be one book, now I have about 5 books. and then I just got back from San Marcos Island. I was at a seven spiritual laws of success retreat with Deepak Chopra, his last one. And he's been like my mentor and spiritual guru for over a decade.
Nice.
So he inspired a whole other book. So, Jay, the thing about it is, in identifying the future of From the Heart, it's different than the future of Halim Ali, Dr. Halim Ali. Right. So the book is more of a personal endeavor, a goal that I, at a very young age, Jay, I set 3 goals. I wanted to make records. I wanted to go to Africa, and I wanted to become a black belt in martial arts. So I've done all of those things. So now writing a book has become part of my. Once we achieve goals, I always tell people, Jay, we got to set bigger goals.
That's right. We need new ones.
We don't stop dreaming.
That's right.
Why do we stop dreaming? Just because we're fathers or we're older? No, man. Come on, we still got breath in us, right?
Oh, geez. Well, I hope you can find 15 minutes somewhere during the day to sleep or eat.
Oh, man, you know what, Jay? I have the most amazing support system and the most amazing team. And I mean, it sounds like a lot. Khalil Gibran said in one of his books, he said, in the life of a flower that never sees its own shadow because it's so busy looking up. So, I'm so busy doing the work, I don't see the shadow. I don't see the compassion fatigue and the burnout and the things a lot of my colleagues experience.
Yeah.
I'm excited to do this work every day.
That's awesome. Well, and thinking of kind of along those same lines, what are some of the greatest lessons you've learned along the way that you would share with somebody who's looking to do this kind of work?
Wow. I would say to be mindful of how you spend your time and what you give your attention to. I would also say have a practice. Have a practice, meaning, for me, I have several practices. I have a meditation practice. I have a workout and exercise practice. Then I have my Shaolin Temple practice. Then I have my studying practice to where I write and I'll read or I'll take notes, right? So, it's not solely about the work. It's because if you're unable to do the work, then the work doesn't exist. Yeah. So you have to put your oxygen mask on first and make sure self-care has become such a notable word anymore, but it's real. Yeah. But there's ways to do that. I have learned to go back, honestly, Jay, and I'll say this, in all honesty and transparency, but I've gone back to building Legos, to things I used to enjoy as a child.
That's awesome.
Right? That at one point in life, I said, I'm too old for Legos.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, I went and bought me a Yoda. And man, I sat there for about 3 hours building that thing, oblivious to my phone, to the work, to the world. And when I came back to the world, I felt renewed. Right? So we have to recharge. We have to know how to recharge. We have to know what that looks like. Absolutely.
Great advice. So this is not a fair question, but I'll ask anyway. Do you have a favorite success story or two that you could share?
Wow. Oh, man.
That's impossible, right?
Oh, no, it's not. You know what? Ooh. God, it's so many. It's so many. I would say the greatest success story to date that it still is a very taboo conversation, right? And we are still addressing this elephant in the room. But for the first gun violence awareness and suicide prevention wellness event in 2021, December, in finishing the mini movie, and finishing Triggers, the mini movie, we highlighted 3 different characters. Now, one was the young man from the hood who was being invited into gang violence and drugs and things of that nature. The second was a young man from the suburbs who had the Black father, the white mother, and he began to be, his triggers began when he had a best friend, OD, on barbiturates. But the third character was a young man from the LGBT community, right? And a young African-American male. And I was very intentional about that character because I was curious as to what this conversation looks like. Because in breaking generational curses, what I realized is that I was raised a certain way. All the men around me were hyper masculine. So it was never about asking or seeking a question. If this is how you appeared, this is just what you were.
Right.
In this space, we look beyond appearances. Right. So in inviting this young man to the first day we got his footage is when I met him. And when he showed up, he had this, spandex, leopard skin spandex, purple suede high heel boots, very flamboyant. And when I looked at him, I chose to see the man before I saw the facade and the aesthetic. Right. And I hugged him.
Great lesson.
We went and we got his parts. And when I tell you, it was phenomenal. He was like a force of nature. He was an anomaly. And so after we got his parts and got all the footage, I'm talking to him about what I do. And he, I remember, I'll never forget this, but he was so intrigued and captivated, and he stuck his right arm out, Jay, and he had a fresh tattoo on his right arm. And he said, this is where I was going to cut myself on my next suicide attempt. And, I said, your next suicide attempt? Well, when was your last suicide attempt? And he said, it was 2 months ago. He says, my best friend and I, we agreed we were going to kill ourselves at the same time and meet each other on the other side. She succeeded and I failed.
Oh, geez.
So I got this tattoo to honor her. And I was going to take my life a month after getting this tattoo. But then I got a call to be in this mini movie, and it's the only reason I'm alive. Wow.
Jeez. That's goosebumps.
Right? But these are the rewards that we don't seek, that we don't know that what we're doing, what I'm doing, what I was doing with that at that time actually was saving a life. And I didn't know that.
Right.
I didn't know it. So yeah, man.
Wow. So what really keeps you, where does this energy come from, and what really gets you excited about the future?
Honestly, Jay, my kids and I have 2 grandchildren, and oh my God, it has just been like truly my children. Watching them grow, my 12-year-old daughter, I have a 7-month-year-old son, a 3-year-old granddaughter. My daughter, my oldest daughter, who is 32, our relationship is so beautiful and we've become so close. And
awesome.
After being a young father with her and making mistakes and now being in a space to where all of those relationships are being restored, all of that which I may have ruined, I'm being given an opportunity to fix and to mend with my own hands. And I'm so excited just about that opportunity.
I'll change gears just a little bit. For our last few questions, respect your time. But one thing I always like to ask is, what's something you will listen to, read, or watch today?
Okay, you know what I'm gonna listen. What I would listen to today: Eckhart Tolle's "The Power of Now," the audio book.
Okay.
and Florence Scovel Shinn's The Game of Life and How to Play It, the audiobook.
Nice.
What I will read today, I just came back, my significant other and I, we just came back from a 3-day silent retreat, Jay, game changing. I mean, our only communication was in writing, and we were in a cabin for 3 days, just writing to each other. And on the third day, when it was time to speak, it was like we had so much to say, like we hadn't talked in years.
Volcanoes.
So what I'll probably read today is the 7 spiritual laws of success, the law of pure potentiality, and what it means to go into the silence. And what was the third?
Anything you'll watch.
What I'll watch.
No time for that.
To be honest with you, you know what? My daughter has she has a volleyball banquet. So once I get back home, typically wind down hours, I would say Me, Myself, and Irene or something funny that
light. I like it.
Light, man. Light, man.
I like it. So can you tell us about somebody or whomever has been a really good role model for you in doing the work that you're doing?
I would say that role model living has to come from my mentor, Kenneth Crowley of the Crowley Foundation. He saw something in me and he invested in it. And what he did that was his greatest gift to me was he didn't make me compromise with what he knew I could become. He didn't say, you have to come and work for my organization and I'll teach you the nonprofit game. Nah, he said, look, this is how you do this. And he put his arm around me and he brought me and walked me through how to create programs, what it looks like to get funding. And he always told me, always be a good steward. Right? Always be a good steward. Right. So I would definitely have to, and that's living. Those who are not living, it's so many that have come before us that have paved the way. Right. And I'm not talking about just men who look like me, but I've learned from the teachings of Charles F. Hannell, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Viktor Frankl, all of these great men who have paved the way that endured tremendous sufferings.
Yeah.
And their greatness was born through their suffering in most cases.
Yep.
Yeah, man.
Can you tell me an organization that you really, outside of From the Heart, that you really admire the work they're doing?
Well, definitely, like I said, the Crowley Foundation. I would also say, Apprentice of Peace, youth organization, Deep House with Human Services. They're doing some really great work with people in the community. Center for Trauma and Resilience, right? And honestly, Jay, it's a lot of great organizations that are doing the work. Struggle of Love, right? And you know, the thing about it is within the ecosystem, I feel like you can find what services you need. So it's not just about the work we do, but also being a resource,
right,
for work that we may not provide, but we may have a sister organization, right? And within this ecosystem, what I also see happening is systems of accountability, right? The more we work together, the more we hold each other accountable. So, you know, it creates a healthier environment.
Last one. If anybody wants to learn more about From the Heart, if they want to hire you to be their keynote speaker, support what you're doing, how can they find you?
Wow. So we are all over social media, you know, on Instagram. You know, we're on Instagram at From the Heart ENT. Our website, www.fromtheheartent.com. Also Facebook, From the Heart ENT. And you know, we share our events via Facebook typically, and the website. We have at least 3 to 5 access points a month, where you can experience us virtually. You can experience us in person at least 3 to 5 times a month.
Awesome. We will put all that in the show notes. Dr. Ali, I could not be more impressed. Keep up the great work.
Yes, sir. Jay, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. And I look forward to talking to you again.
Likewise.
All right, my friend.
Thanks for listening to this powerful conversation with Dr. Halim Ali. This podcast has been brought to you by JC Charity Services. If you're interested in how I might be able to bolster your efforts and help your team achieve its goals, I'd love to have a conversation with you. You can find me at makingourworldbetter.com. You can learn more about Dr. Ali and From the Heart Enterprises at fromtheheartent.com or find them on Facebook and Instagram at fromtheheartent. Check the show notes for links, and if you enjoyed this podcast, we'd be grateful if you'd share it with a friend. Until next time, I hope you're inspired to find a way to make our world better.